Starting
Just
to dig
sitting
that on a
backstage,
lot.
grooving
Yeah.
out. Oh, I love it. I love that we have our own brand anthem. Like, that is the coolest ever.
Right? Yeah. Very, very cool.
Built by us for us. So good. Okay.
Mhm.
Today we are talking about one of our pillars of an engaged culture, because we've already done psychological safety, we've already done clear accountabilities, and this one we're doing is strategic improvement.
Mhm. And I think this is your opportunity to talk about strategic versus continuous. And then
Ooh,
that's
gotta get in my soapbox.
yeah, there it
All
is.
right, hang on. I
Run
can
one
get on my
up.
soapbox. Okay, I'm on my soapbox. Okay. I know all of the ISO people might be like freaking out, and I am an ISO trained professional. I'm an auditor, all yada yada yada. Okay. And they always like continuous improvement is a whole section in the 9001 piece, right? And it drives me insane because everybody looks at it and companies are like continuous, we got to keep improving. We got to keep improving. Yes. But what happens is no one's assessing whether it's a strategic improvement. And what I mean by that is that the juice is worth the squeeze. Because if you are continuously improving and changing things, but it's not worth the effort of change, you're going to get change exhaustion in your company and people are going to start resisting everything. So for me, it's not continuous improvement. Like, don't keep doing something. Make sure it's worth the squeeze. So it's strategic improvement. So there needs to be this kind of like checkpoint where it's like, is this change, because change hurts, it's painful, we don't like it, is it going to be worth that little bit of pain, right, for this much benefit? So like having that analysis is so key. So we always say strategic improvement, strategic, it's got to be worth the
Mhm.
squeeze. There, I'm off my soapbox now.
Well, and I think that process is continuous, right? Which, maybe that was the intent of what I was trying to say. But they don't explicitly talk about that, what you described. And I think, like with our team, we built a process for suggesting improvements, but we tried to build into it a manner of thinking about it. So it's not just like, hey, we should get a fish tank, right? It's like, great, you want a fish tank. What's it trying to do? Like, how does this meet with our values? One, right? How does it,
Yeah.
is it going to make the business better? Like, is it taking something to 11 or is it fixing a problem? Which one of those things is it? Okay, great. And how many people is it going to involve to implement it? Are you going to just be able to do it? Or are we going to need like 5 of us from different places to all get together and think about where to put the fish tank, what color things to put in it? Like, and then after, how are we
Yeah.
going to use it? Right? Like, do we need to build a process? Do we need to document it? What about training? Do we do training for it? Like, I want people, we're trying to coach our team so that when they come to us with an idea, they've thought through these things.
Yes.
Those are the questions we're going to ask, right?
Yeah, right. Being able to say, well, I've thought about this. This is how many people, this is how complex, this is the cost, here's the benefit, here's our return on investment. Like, that's, and so to this, I think like one of the key things about a strategic improvement is having a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that process piece. So like, how do you get intakes of ideas? How do you analyze them? How do you have a systematic way of a go, no go decision making? Right? Because if it's like, well, I like you more, so I'm going to do your idea, you're going to kill your culture.
Well, I
Right?
don't think it has to be complicated, right? Like, these kind of things can get complex, but like, if you've got a front lobby with a desk, stick a suggestion box on there and make it colorful. And then once a week, pull it out, and at your team meetings or schedule a time, just like flip through it and be like, hey, suggestion number 1, what does everybody think? Is this a great one? If it's an easy win, do it. Right? If it's a little more complicated, then be like, all right, we're gonna park this one, but come and talk to me about it and let's figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm intrigued, right? Or this is a good idea, but here's some more information, which is why we can't do it right now. Or this is actually similar to something else that somebody else is doing, in which case it's like, we're not going to do your thing exactly, but that's a cool idea. Do you want to just go on that team that's doing that other thing that's similar?
Right?
Right?
Yeah. Get involved.
Energies, do something with it, right? And
Well, and I think that that's like, I know you and I are nerds. Like we love a good piece of tech, right? That handles things and it has automations and all this stuff like that. But you're right. You don't need that to do the process. But what you do need is to have it systematic. So like everybody knows this is how they come with an idea. Everybody knows this is where that idea is tracked. Everybody knows this is how decisions are made, right?
Mhm.
And, we talk about so many companies don't have a decision making philosophy or process, right? And so they get into these battles, right? Because there's nothing to go back to. And I know we've worked with companies where we've had to give them a decision making process and tool to help them have these conversations because it's like, well, why do you think that? And going back and forth. And we always say the first thing is like, there's a litmus test that's should be no more than 10 minutes. You review the scope. Does it align with your values? Is it in line with your mission? And is it going to get you to your vision? And if all those are yes, then it's like, okay, we can go to the next step
Mhm.
in the
And I,
analysis.
and I think it's important to note, like, there's a difference between quick wins and big projects, right? Like, we say, like, if you're trying to start an improvement culture, then just ask around. And like a great example is like, the people like the coffee in the kitchen. If not, fix it. Source a new one, change it, whatever you got to do. It's an easy
Right?
win. You don't have to get a ton of approval. You just kind of do it, right? You might have talked to one person who orders the stuff, whatever, right? There's like tiny little wins that aren't such a big deal, right? This
Yeah.
Excel template is terrible. Do you mind if I just tinker with it a little bit and automate some of this for you?
Right.
There's things you can do in your job that don't require, you know, large amounts of approvals and all this kind of stuff,
Budget
right?
and complexity.
Right. But I think that culture of ongoing improvement is this idea of not walking by mediocrity, right? And our
I
friend
love that.
Bruno, shout out to Bruno. We're going to tell his
I went
story
to
about,
Brew.
right? And he talked about cleaning the floors in his office, right? And asking somebody to clean the floors, and then so they picked up a bunch of stuff, but they left like a piece of paper in the corner, something like that.
They walked by it.
Yeah.
Like they were coming into the office, right? And he
Mhm.
was sitting there. They didn't know he was there. And it was out front of their office building, not their responsibility, not, you know. And so like they walked by and they didn't look at the piece of paper, pick it up. They didn't even take a minute to care.
Mhm.
Right. And that's what I love about and now I can never walk by a piece
Oh,
of
I know.
garbage.
Every time I think about it, it's like this little Bruno on my shoulders, like, "Hey, don't walk by mediocrity." I'm like,
Who has a
"Yes."
shoulder Bruno? Who has a shoulder Bruno? Like
Yeah.
seriously, I too have a shoulder Bruno.
Right.
That's like constantly telling me what to do.
Yeah.
Oh
But that's
man.
the idea of don't walk by mediocrity. It doesn't matter if it's your job. If you see something that could be better, speak up. That's really the culture piece we're trying to do. You add the system for suggesting ideas and all that kind of stuff to try and facilitate the process. But really, what you want is this idea of a culture of people walk by and be like, "Hey, I noticed that this and this happened. Here's something I could do to help you," or whatever. Right?
Right?
Um,
Like
it-
it reminds me of that escape room we built for that engineering firm when I was contracted there, you were employee there.
mhm,
That's when we met, right? It's
mhm.
like the culture was going down, it was recession and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And we're like, we should build an escape room that people can play in the boardroom.
Mhm.
We didn't get any approval for it, right? We did it on our own time. We built it and we rolled it out just to build connection and try to like make people feel better, right? And it didn't cost anything.
Just our time, right?
Just
So,
just our own personal time, but like the impact it had was great. Like people were having fun. We got, IT involved. It was like a blast, right? And so
mhm,
it was not walking by, seeing that there was a problem and not walking by and taking onus of it. And, did it give us payback financially? No. But this is what, 7 years later, and we just took that concept and created our own team building workshop that out of a box, right? Based off of some of the philosophies that we used from that. So like now it will pay off.
I think there's so much value in creating for the sake of creating sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And if you're in a space where it's not, things are on fire all the time, you're not so like running around and feeling burnt out and frantic. If you've got systems that have calmed the noise, you find that space and you create and you make more systems that do even better job, and you find new tech and you're like, ooh, AI, I'm going to test that, see how I can plug that into Excel. Hey, look at this. I built an Excel sheet in 5 minutes, that
Right.
automated this entire whatever. Right. But I think a lot of times we go in, we talked about psychological safety and accountability and all that kind of stuff. A lot of times we'll host a workshop on this stuff, and at the end of the day, people are so connected, like it's just intensely strong. And I always feel like in that moment, those people could do anything,
Right.
no matter the size of the problem, right? So taking that connection and energy and then pointing it at something, that's where the power of it comes in. So the escape room just started to reinforce connection that was starting to dissolve because of layoffs and things of that nature, right? So
yeah,
I always got this idea in my mind that there's an argument that reinforcing that connection is the most important thing you could possibly do.
right. I agree. Like there's innovation that comes from that, that connectedness, and that saying to somebody, and this is how you and I got started. Agent, you'd say, you come to my office, agent, because at the time I was Smith. So Agent Smith for any Matrix nerds out there. Agent, got a minute? And we would
Right.
philosophize, right? And we would talk about potential opportunities for improvement, and then we would go do them. And one of those ideas was like, what if we had a company?
Right. Yeah. That's do the things, right?
Do things.
How many times have we seen it where we've, whatever, we do a workshop, we come up with this list of ideas and it's so amazing, and then like, awesome. And then you go back in the whirlwind and of course it sweeps you away, right? So I don't know.
And then that's where the process comes in. Like there has to be a strategic improvement process where it's like, okay, we're going to meet on this, frequency, and like it might need to be quarterly. Maybe it's annually. If you're small, you don't need to do it all the time, right? Or maybe it's as needed, but it's at a minimum something, right? Have that so you're keeping the needle moving. So you're saying, okay, this project's going. And I think that brings us like to one of the key elements of strategic improvement is transparency. Because no one wants to like put an idea forward that needs to go through a approval process. They can't just do themselves kind of thing. And then it's like, you hear nothing, crickets, for a year, for 2 years, right? You're like, so I think having that transparency where we say like, it's a go, it's good, this is the timeline, and here's our project. So the person who came up with the idea, right? Or it's not a go, we know it's a good idea, it's not a go for these reasons. And that's okay. It's okay to say no, right, to people. And just, or like, not right now. Great idea, not right now. We'll keep it on the radar.
Sure.
Right?
And I think
our team comes with us with tons of ideas and we're like, love it. Not in the budget this year,
Right? There's lots of factors to it. And I think timeliness as well. So like timely transparency. So if I give you an idea, if you want to like reinforce that culture of ideas, you better be responding within, I'm going to say, a month, right? It'll be like, better hear back something, right? And if I know that the team who reviews this stuff meets monthly, then I know that I'm going to hear the next day, hey, we saw your idea or whatever. Or at the very least acknowledge it. Hey, received your idea. And this is stuff you can automate pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
Hey, like, fantastic. Received your idea. Super excited to review it. We meet on the 13th or second Friday of every month.
We'll let you know.
We'll let you know, right? Whatever.
Yeah. Or have it accessible so people can see where it is, right?
Sure. Or like, do you want to just come and be a fly on the wall of the meeting and hear how we discuss about it? Open door. Come on in, right?
Ooh, yeah, I love that.
Why not? If the team loves that idea so much that they want to all be present, and that creates a problem, then sort that problem out, get a bigger room, or do it differently, or do it online, or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think the point is, though, that you're reinforcing it, and don't ask if you're not going to answer, because you will lose trust so fast you won't even know, your head will be spinning, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Absolutely. And that's one way, like, so when we're going through this process in our decision making and we start prioritizing, because you could have 12 yeses, but it might not be in the budget or the capacity to do all 12, right? So then which ones do you do first? Right. And so, like, looking at the highest impact and the lowest resources, or resources being money, people, whatever, right? The lowest complexity, if you will. If you map out complexity versus impact and you take those ones, those are great, right? High impact, low cost, low resources, low complexity, perfect. Take those, right? Low hanging fruit, if you will. But your low hanging fruit, you're going to have and like you mentioned this earlier, Adam, the big wins and the little wins. And we always advise our clients to do, like, have a big win in the works, but pick a couple low hanging fruit and pick a couple what we call quick wins. And what's the philosophy behind that? You tell them.
You're trying to build trust, right? So quick wins, there's a million of them all over the place. They make sense. Don't think too hard about it. And a quick win, always defined as like one person can do it within a week by themselves, right? Yeah, do it. Awesome idea. Put the sign up. Cool idea, right? Whatever it is, just do them, and do them fast, and do them timely, and show that you're doing them. And that is how you get people's attention and show that you're for real, right? And then these big projects are kind of like, hey, what if we got an ERP, or like, what if we, I don't know,
added a new business line.
Sure, whatever. Or maybe we need to document a process. That's going to be something we're going to need lots of input from lots of different people. It's going to take months, not weeks or days. But I think what we were talking about beforehand is, like, quick wins are usually small things that have a big impact very positively right away. So you just do them. Makes sense, right? And that's that don't walk by mediocrity. Constantly iterate. Big projects are like big change things. You will do them to solve bigger issues, but they will create a whole set of other issues, which then hopefully iterative quick wins will sort out afterwards.
Right?
So, progress, not perfection, I think is sometimes. I think we've seen this where you plan and you're trying to bake up this idea to perfection, but you never actually launch it, and then you end up spending way too much time and money on it. But when like 80% go, fine.
Yes.
Iterate and improve it afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
And I think too, to that, like, you and I talk a lot about that, and we have this graph. I wish I had it prepped. We could have shown it, but it's literally the way you do improvements and the speed of change, right? And so, like, and we talk about, like, democracy versus aristocracy versus a dictatorship kind of thing. So, like, one person says, this is how we're doing it, and they don't get any input. Fine, but adoption is going to be low, right? Versus, like, a full, like, autonomy where everybody, like, has to agree before anything happens. Great. Once everybody agrees, it'll be implemented fast, but getting everybody to agree is going to be, like, forever, right? And on the spectrum. So it's finding that sweet spot, right? Implementing change, because the rate of change is important too, for that feeling the movement, right? You don't want to get stuck.
And we've seen these initiatives get stuck when that decision by committee is chosen. Like, oh, we've got a working group or a task force, they sometimes call them, and sometimes they name the initiative, and we're all going to do it. And what happens is it starts to spin a little bit, because you need one person in there that, in the charter or whatever, can veto things and move them along, right?
Yeah.
That's how people work. Sometimes you'll get stuck. You need someone that's going to make a decision, right or wrong, right?
Yeah, go for it, because those, like you said, the incremental wins, the little ones, they'll help fix it, right? They'll fix the
Mhm.
fallouts. It's so funny. I have to share this story. We're working with a client, and I'm not going to say what tool they're implementing, but they're implementing a really big um, like tool, right? Big software,
Mhm.
and it was an absolute shit show, like as far as adoption and like the process of change. It was so painful, and like to celebrate them being done and implementing it, they gave everybody logoed stress balls. They probably should have gave those out at the beginning of it.
That's funny.
But like but to that point, I mean, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, um, celebrate the wins. Like we forget to look back and see how far we've come.
Mhm. Yeah, on a time scale of a year, it's crazy how much you've done, right? Whereas when you're constantly working at stuff, it feels like, two steps back, one step forward. So you're
Yeah.
constantly, it feels like you're failing, but really on a big, if you zoom out, you're like, holy crap, we did a lot. It's actually kind
Yeah.
of remarkable how much we did, right? Um,
We have a question. Is there an upper limit of people for when you stop using decision by committee?
ooh,
I don't know. I say we gotta whatever you're doing, you need the stakeholders. So
mhm.
I apparently we're not allowed to use that word anymore, but what do we call them? Interested parties. Okay,
Oh,
you
great.
um so those people who it's going to affect to have a say, right? But I think Adam mentioned it a little bit. I don't think there's an upper limit of people. Um if they're affected, they should have a say, but when to bring them in might be relevant, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think the idea of, it goes back to something as simple as a ratio chart, right? Like which people need to be informed. Which ones are you going to get their opinion once you've got it half baked? And you'll be like, hey, here's the structure. What do you think? And then which ones actually need to be on the ground floor building it?
Yeah,
Because too many cooks in the kitchen is going to be struggle as well, right?
totally. Totally. And I
Um,
think I think it's easier too for like those people who need to be consulted to have something. They don't need to start from a blank slate, but letting them know like, hey, this is happening. We're gonna get something drafted up and then bring you in to like help us rip it apart. Right.
mhm,
Um, like giving that transparency. We talked about communication transparency. It's huge in these things. Being able to say that to them, they're like, okay, one, I know it's happening. I'm not surprised. Two, I know that I'm going to get something that I can give my input on, and my input's going to be requested. But I don't have to get my hands dirty. These meetings are expensive to have that many people sitting in a room building from scratch versus like bringing the right people in at a time where they can give their input and letting them know like nothing's off the table just because we've drafted this. Like, go ahead, tear it apart. That's what this is for, right? But we didn't want you to start from a blank slate because that's where too many cooks, right, definitely gets difficult, right? You just want the chefs to come in, taste it, and be like, more salt, if we're using
right?
that analogy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but when you're in those situations and you are bringing people in to consult that have strong opinions and lots of influence, I think it's really important to read their body language when they come in and kind of get a sense of them. Because sometimes I'll get people come in and I can tell right away that they're just like itching for a fight.
Yeah.
So there's definitely ways like, hey, thanks so much for coming. I heard that you were the smartest person here and that you basically keep this place running. Is that true? And immediately they're like, oh, yeah, well, right? Okay, awesome. I'm so happy you're here. So we have this idea. I want you to tell me how terrible an idea it is. So you just like disarm it in like 2 seconds. You totally dismantle whatever shield they had up
Yeah.
because you're basically flattering them a little bit and then inviting them to the party essentially. And it's really easy to do, but it takes a lot of practice to pick up on it, I think. um,
Yeah, and absolutely, and I think you talk about ones that we facilitated being able to read the language and disarm. That's where facilitators are really good at keeping the flow. So like for those complex changes, for those complex improvements, having a facilitator does a couple things psychologically when we talk about culture, right? Having a facilitator allows someone to ask the absolute what could be the silliest, stupidest questions, right? And typically it's the facilitator, right? And then really bear with me because I don't do your job. right? And they give them a little bit more grace,
Mhm.
right? It also lets people be on a even playing field because they're not trying to facilitate and have a say at the same time, right? They can just sit back and be in their head in the process and do that. And the facilitator is managing that. It also allows them to unbiasedly park ideas and say, we're going to, form a subcommittee on that particular one because it clearly is a can of worms, right? Whatever that is. But it allows them to do that without feeling like there's bias, right? And so there's a time when a facilitator can help the culture stay strong throughout these painful change processes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Facilitators is another tool in the tool chest, right? Good leadership will kind of pick and choose when it's a good time to use a third party or to, handle it themselves, or to a lot of cases, delegate to your people first. Let them try at it first and come to the realization that they need help, right? I've done that before. Like, all right, this is gonna be a bit of a disaster, but like, let's see. Right. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think as we round out the half hour here, top 3 things: strategic improvement.
Process, system, number
Right?
one,
You need some
right?
system. You need your suggestion box, right?
From idea to completion to communication, or to no go to communication, whatever it is, you need to have a system. And that brings us to point 2, transparency, right? Transparency,
Hmm.
communication, right? Like really making sure that people know their idea was heard, where it is in the process, or why it isn't going.
Hmm.
And then lastly is the movement, right? Making sure that you're doing some small wins. People see that there's change because nobody wants to come to work feeling like they're dealing with the same issues and frustrations that they dealt with yesterday and the day before and the day before that. They want to know that there's a way to get better, right?
And I think that last one was best illustrated um, with we knew a company that had those micro surveys, those
Yes.
pulse surveys,
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
it's like one question a week. You just answer it. Did it super fast, and people were all answering it. And what happened was, after 3 months, people stopped answering, and they got annoyed. Why? Because I didn't have an improvement program, so nothing was changing. So after a while, the question started to repeat, and they were like, "What am I doing this for?"
What am I
Right?
doing this for? You
Whereas,
haven't even changed anything that I mentioned the last 3 months, right?
yeah, whereas if you had that process going and the stuff was happening, then when the question comes up and it's the same one, yeah, absolutely, like the deal has moved, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was just an interesting story about how it demonstrated how the lack of that program made their culture kind of stale, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
stale might be a harsh word, but not not moving forward. So
Well, and this is why, like, strategic improvement in the last minute is a pillar of culture. It
mhm.
is, because people want to be engaged, they wanna have an effect, right? They wanna be part of something, they wanna see that they've had impact, right? And they want to, not get frustrated and stay in that frustration zone. So, like, you could have all the other pillars, but you're just like a three-legged chair, it's gonna be a little bit tippier, right, for your culture. And so without this pillar, you're gonna get people who are disengaged, because they're dealing with the same thing over and over and over again, right? And I think we're in a place where people want more from their jobs.
There you go. Right. I think that's a good
Yeah,
mic drop moment, right?
boom.
Okay.
People want more. No surprise. And next time, we are going to talk about effective communication, because that's the last pillar, of an engaged culture, is effective communication and what that means internally, externally, digitally, and all of those things. So stay tuned.
All right.
See you next week.